What's up, Black Comic Lords? Once again, we're on with another dope edition of our Black Comic Creators Highlight Series, and we are on with the one and only Mr. David F. Walker.
What's up? How you doing? Good to see you.
The baddest mofo in comics.
I think that's Rodney Barnes. If I'm going to be 100% honest with you, I really think it's Rodney Barnes. But
come on, man, don't sell yourself short.
I'm not going to sell myself short, but you know, Rodney's like, he's no joke, and he's tall. Have you ever met him?
I haven't met him in real life. No.
He is. I want to say he's like 6'6", something like that. He's really tall. And he won't. I shouldn't be saying anything about this. Like, I'm talking about him behind his back. But there's a point where he was like a professional wrestler. He was doing professional wrestling at one point, and he was and this one he talks about his break in film was he was Michael Clark Duncan's stand-in on the Green Mile. So that'll give you an idea of how big he really is.
Yeah.
But just also a really good guy, really dope guy.
Well, you're David F. Walker, and F I've established stands for friggin'. David frickin' Walker. I don't know what the F stands for, but that's what I'm saying it is. I'm declaring that's what it is.
It's okay.
You have out little ditty that you guys wrote, you, Chuck Brown, and drawn by Sanford Green. Bitterroot, the next movement.
That's right.
Literally, if I could, I'd be playing the Roots' Next Movement song as our intro music. But every time I do that, YouTube snarls at me and says, we're going to kick you off of YouTube if you do that. And the Black Comic Lords yell at me and say, stop getting us demonetized all the time. This has been a dope book, man.
Thank you.
It's layers upon layers upon layers. And I feel like, you know how I know your book is dope? Because every time I read an issue, I start Google searching and like, that's an interesting fact I did not know. Let me see if that's a real thing. Because you can't tell with these guys there's always some Easter eggs of knowledge that these guys are dropping. There's always a level of edutainment in these books. And I have to write a thesis.
Do you get like, so I had this happen to me. There was an episode of Atlanta, the last season of Atlanta, The Goof Who Sat by the Door, and was to me one of the greatest episodes of TV in history
ever.
And I'm watching it, and the whole time I was going, I know this isn't true. I know this isn't real.
But you had to look it up, didn't you?
Real. This can't be real. And it became almost like a rodeo. Like, how long can you stay on the bull? And I was like, I'm not going to look this up. I'm not going to look this up. And I didn't make it to the end of the episode. I had to look it up. And I was like, oh, he got me. And it was beautiful. But I love that feeling when you have to look something up. But I have to address this right now. They said Sinners is biting bitter root.
Oh, this comes up all the time. Go ahead and break this down, because you've come on the show before and explained that that's not the case. And to this day, people are still, I'm like reposting the video the interview that we did before with you where you talked about this. Please tell the fans your thoughts on Sinners, which is a great, fantastic film.
Okay, so first of all, I've seen Sinners 3 times now.
Only 3 times?
Only 3 times. I'm getting ready. I was just talking to my friend Brian Bendis like a couple hours ago, and we were supposed to go see it together, and then something came up, we didn't go, and then he still hasn't seen it yet. And I said, oh, I've seen it 3 times. And he got all mad at me, and I was like, I'll watch it a 4th time. Like this, I can't tell you the last time I've seen a movie in the theaters more than once. But this one is it. So Sinners is not a ripoff of Bitterroot in any capacity, in any way, shape, or form. Bitterroot has a relationship with Ryan Coogler and Proximity. Proximity is his production company, in that Bitterroot was optioned by Legendary. Legendary was going to turn it into a movie. Ryan Coogler and Proximity were signed on to produce it, and Regina King was signed on to direct it. And at some point, not through anything that Ryan, Regina, Proximity, none of those people did anything to mess up the deal. The deal went away eventually. And around the time that Sinners was announced as coming out, and just a little bit, it's set during the 1930s, and it's monsters, blah, blah, blah. One of the first things I did was, not just myself, but my producing partner, our lawyer, everybody, we reached out to Proximity and said, hey, we just want to make sure there ain't going to be some problems down the road, right? Like let's not get into a public battle over this. And they said, yeah, no, it's not gonna, don't worry about it. It was basically what they said. And I had faith in them. And so I went and saw it opening weekend, and was pleasantly surprised, that they didn't rip us off, and there's some similarities, but the problem is, when we're talking about Black content, like, any similarities can become almost problematic, because we don't get to tell our stories that often, right? We don't get, and so there's always this comparison, and to me, it's, look, I appreciate the people that think that that they ripped us off. They didn't. And I've told people, I've gone on social media and said, if you're not going to see Sinners because you're mad that they ripped us off, then you're a fool, right? So, again, I love the movie. I think it's one of the best movies I've seen in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And what was really clear to me was, and like, I know for a fact Coogler and the folks at Proximity are fans of Bitterroot. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed on to produce it. I know they're familiar with it. And then I'll address this thing that was in the comment. But what, at the end of the day, what really, first off, you don't have any control over how some of this sort of stuff works, right? And so you make a choice to either be mad or not be mad. And what a lot of people don't get is that, or what they don't think about is, like, we're all influenced by the things we see, the things we read, the music we listen to, right? So I could tell everybody, oh yeah, no, there's a scene in Bitterroot in the comic that's straight out of the movie Jaws, right? How would you know? Like because it's changed enough, but Jaws influenced me. In the first issue of The Next Movement, which we talked about a month ago, there's a I said in the script, I said, this is the scene from Goodfellas where Henry Hill goes to the Copacabana Club for the first time. And I sent a link to the scene. It's that famous one shot where it's all, single take. And I said to Sanford in the script, I said, I don't know how you make this happen in a comic, but this is what I want to see. He just ignored me anyway, but that's beside the point. Like, we're all, as creatives, we're all influences. We're all the product of our influences. We just have to make sure that we don't outright rip people off, right? And so I can't say this enough, that Bitterroot or Sinners didn't rip off Bitterroot. And as somebody said in the comments, there's going to be people that will accuse Bitterroot of biting Sinners. Yeah, I don't care. I really don't. Like, if we could get, first off, if we get to a point where there's a movie of Bitterroot, which we're still working towards having, I'd be more than happy. There's always going to be people making comparisons. There's always going to be people saying you rip somebody off, you rip this person off. If an idea is good and solid, you're going to see quite a few people, doing a variation of it. It's just like, there's a reason why so many hip hop acts sampled both Parliament Funkadelic and James Brown and and folks like that. Why? Because they made great music that was super funky. And as hip hop was evolving, and you had all these artists who didn't have instruments that they could play, the DJ became crucial in composing these songs that they took from somewhere else. This is how it works.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you said was most poignant. When you're starving for content,
mm-hmm.
it's rare. It's natural to make comparisons, because it's not like you have a whole table full of things to select from or compare it to.
Yeah.
And we haven't had a film on this level
Ever.
in this genre ever. It's the first. Yeah. It's just like Coogler did it again. Like when he did Black Panther, that had never been done before.
Yeah.
It had literally never been done before. So
I could make you the argument that he even did something similar with Creed, which
yeah,
is that not only did he make us care about Stallone as an actor and the character of Rocky Balboa again, all of which are past their prime, but he told a story that is so common, the underdog story, that we forgot we'd seen the underdog story like 1,000 times. You know what I'm saying?
right,
He
right.
actually he reinvented a genre with Creed in such a
For a whole
way
new generation.
for a whole new generation. And the beautiful thing about Creed, I talk about this movie a lot, is like you didn't have to see a single Rocky movie to understand Creed, right? And with Black Panther, it was, in a lot of ways, it's one of the only Marvel movies didn't need to see any of the other Marvel movies to understand it. It was very unique in that way. And then the thing with Sinners is like there is nothing to see before it, right? Because it's not from existing IP. It's not a remake. It's not an adaptation. Um, and to me, you know, I can't emphasize enough. I mean, I did get mad watching Sinners because it was so dope. It was once in a while something comes along that's so good, you're just like, and you're shaking your fist. And that was there was moments of that in Sinners for me, but it was that good angry. There's
Yeah,
that anger you get like I don't know, like I liked Kendrick Lamar's first album. I did, but Pimp a Butterfly made me angry because Pimp
yeah,
a Butterfly was like, I can't make music, but if I could, this is what I would want to do.
right. I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
With that genre, it's rare for a horror film to do that well, you
Yes.
know. And then you add to that not just a horror film, it's a rated R horror film, and you add to that it's a period piece, and then you add to that it's got a bunch of black folk in it.
And you add to that,
Technically,
it's basically a musical.
and they threw a musical in there, um, which has sabotaged several projects in the past
Yeah.
by throwing in a musical.
Yeah.
Marvels were looking at you. Um, Technically, on paper, this movie should not be successful.
No.
If you're going by the industry standards of what they determine what works and what doesn't, this movie should not be as successful it is. That being said, kind of shattered that glass ceiling, so to speak. Does that open up doors for you guys in your set for trying to do the Bitterroot movie, you think? Does it make it now a good opportunity for you guys to revisit trying to get this thing on film?
I'm gonna optimistically say I think so. Yes. I mean, there's a lot to be determined. Um, and here's the thing: we're still on really good terms with Proximity, Ryan, his whole team, and
Yeah,
Regina and her whole team, right? So we are. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but we're no longer at Legendary, right? We're no longer that deal, that option expired, and we opted not to renew it for a whole host of reasons. But before we let that option expire, we talked to everybody. We talked to all the other players because part of the reason we chose to let it expire was Legendary made some decisions that was going to force Ryan out of producing and force Regina out of directing. And it was like, okay, well, you can't get a better team than you guys had assembled, and you've blown it.
right.
And now you want to renew the option. Who are you going to go to? Right? Because we literally had, I remember in the very beginning when they said, when we were first talking, we hadn't even signed the deal at Legendary, and they were like, can you put together a wish list of who you'd like to work with on this? And it was a very short list for me. And my top three choices of directors, Regina King was at the top of the list, right? And Regina and Ryan as director. And I said, but as producer, I said, let's get Coogler and his team at Proximity. And they were like, oh, that's, we'll never be able to get them. And I said, well, you said put together a wish list, right? And so this is the wish list. And I said, but what I can tell you is that from what I understand, Coogler's already a fan of the comic, I can't remember what store he was buying his comics at in LA, but he was going into the comic store on Wednesday, picking up Bitterroot, and that sort of news travels, right? So I knew he was reading the comic, and so I told Legendary, I said, how hard is it to make a phone call, right? How hard is it? And so so I would still, there's still possibilities that we'll work with those folks, and we're still out there pushing it. We're still out there pushing it, and I think that the success of Sinners will open the door for us, as long as the success of every Black movie has ever opened the door for anyone, which is not very long, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, when you stop and look at like the success of both Black Panther, which I think is an amazing film, and I think World of Wakanda is a good film given all the limitations, the biggest of which was the star had tragically died. When you look at all that, there should have been way more Black content in terms of superheroes or genre pieces, sci-fi, fantasy, all that sort of stuff. What we saw was a lot of casting in pieces, which did nothing but piss off, you know, the that sort of toxic white masculinity fan base.
Right.
But like this is a true story. I made a documentary in the 90s about blaxploitation films, and I shot most of it 96, 97, and I interviewed a lot of people: Fred Williamson, Jim Brown, Jim Kelly, Rudy Ray Moore, all these folks. And so in 96, 97,
What was it called?
the documentary is called Macked, Hammered, Slaughtered, and Shafted. Don't watch it on YouTube. Watch it on Vimeo.
Okay.
But the one thing that everybody talked to me about, and keep in mind that this is 1996 and 97, the one thing everybody talked about was the failure of The Wiz, which came out in 78, 79.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So nearly 20 years later, Hollywood was still using the failure of The Wiz to keep from putting money into bigger Black productions. It was the same reason why no one wanted to make Color Purple, was because of the failure of The Wiz, and it took Spielberg and Quincy Jones coming together to make The Color Purple back in whatever that was, 84, 85.
Yeah.
And now with Sinners, it's very clear, and it does my heart good when I see white folks like Ben Stiller and Chris Evans, and them pointing out the hypocrisy and the double standard that is applied to us, and then to have it applied to us with Thunderbolts. You know, Thunderbolts comes out and Variety talks about what a big hit it is.
It did. They completely contradicted themselves.
Yes. and the thing is like, it's that sort of behavior, that sort of ideology, that sort of thinking is so prevalent that, you know, that it's difficult to break away from it. It's institutionalized. There's a reason they call it institutionalized racism, and a lot of things can be institutionalized, not just racism. And so for me, it's just kind of hilarious watching. Like, I was in LA 3 weeks or so before Sinners opened, and so I was hearing a lot of conversations at these meetings I was taking about different things, and everybody was talking about how Sinners was going to fail, and how Warner Brothers wasn't actively marketing it properly, and how there were some people that believed there's people at Warner Brothers that were trying to bury it, all these sort of things. And you just sort of sit back and I listen to these stories and I go, okay, yeah, we'll see. And then that Variety article said it all. It really did, because they're yeah. I'm not the less I say about Variety, the better. But I wasn't surprised. I was just disappointed because when you look at again the success of Coogler's other movies, you look at the success of Jordan Peele's movies, you look at the success of some of the other films that have come out, I'll say within the last I can't remember when Get Out came out. I think that came out in like around 2016 or so. But over the last nearly 10 years, like, Black filmmakers and Black film have disproven every single myth that, you know, that Black films can't be sold overseas, that you can't appeal to a large white audience. And that was the thing that got me with Sinners was opening weekend, that first weekend. I was like, okay, this isn't bad, but this is still technically just black folks' money. This is
Yeah.
what happens if a lot of black folks go to a movie.
It's the
And
overseas money that's interesting.
the overseas money is interesting, but that second weekend domestic, I was like, yep, white people are going to see it. You know, that was the same thing happened with Get Out. Same thing happened with Black Panther. You know, I did this back when I was still working as a journalist. I wrote a piece about Tyler Perry very early in his career, because in the beginning of Tyler Perry's career, he did his theatrical movies would always make a big chunk of money opening weekend. And like Variety and Hollywood Reporter and all these things were talking about sort of the miracle of Tyler Perry, like he was some sort of cinematic god. And I broke the numbers down, and I was like, okay, this is how much money Tyler Perry's movie is making. There's a number of screens he's playing on, and I said, and what you're seeing is this is what happens when the black people who don't go to the movies over the weekend, and that's your aunties, your grandma, maybe your mother, the black folks who really are alienated from the motion picture industry. That nobody's making movies for them. This one person is making movies for them, and I broke the. I'll see if I could ever find that article again, because it's pretty fascinating. Because I was like, this is all you need to do, because his movies were hitting around 20-30 million opening weekend, and I was like, those are good numbers for him, but you don't need, like, what tickets are, what, $15 a piece, $10 a piece. Like, what happens if every black woman between the ages of like 30 and 70 went to go see Tyler Perry movies? They would make this much, so.
All right. Well, one of the things you talked about was institutional racism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we got to bring up Bitterroot.
Yeah.
Segue. Where's my producer guy? There he is. All right. So let's do a recap as to what happened with the last issue.
Okay.
We got introduced into this new world 60 years later. 30 years later. 1964.
It was the end of issue 15. There's an epilogue that takes place in like 1938 or 39, I think.
Yeah. Shout out to Wraithx. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the super chat. In Hollywood, white mediocrity celebrated, while white failure is seen as a misstep, black success seen as a fluke. Yep. But Bitterroot is a success. So, all right. Kind of like the Freedom Writers, I guess.
Yes.
Please talk about this.
Yeah, no. So the opening of issue 1 came out a little over a month ago. We see a group of we call them Freedom Riders. That's what they were called back in the 60s, and they're on a mission to help register voters in the South, which was what was happening. And they're attacked. They're attacked by the jinoo, and all but 3 are killed. The 3 that aren't killed are missing, and that's what issue 1 is all about. And there's a team that's been dispatched to investigate both the killings and find the 3 that are missing. Nobody knows for sure if those 3 are alive or not. If I remember correctly, at the end of issue 1, I'm trying to remember, the timing of everything gets messed up, because like I'm done writing all this stuff. It's like, what happened in issue 3? I don't know what happened in issue 3. So, so we left it off where, there's a new team that's been introduced. It's 1964. Nearly as near as we can tell, the only original family member that the readers would know, Blink, seems to be the only person left from the original cast, at least right now.
Although we have Cotton as an adult now.
Cotton as an adult, yes.
Yeah. All right.
And
then
Meriah, we see Meriah born, or not born, but we see her as a baby in the last issue of issue 15, because Meriah is the daughter of Berg.
And now she's all grown up.
Yep.
And she's working with the feds.
Yep.
Which we're going to talk about in a bit. So that brings us to Bitterroot, the next movement, number 2. Sanford has this great, uh, one of your best marketing tools that you guys have had on the Bitterroot has been the covers.
Mm-hmm.
For comic book collectors like us at blackcomiclords, these covers become like an odyssey to like
Yeah.
collect. Some of them are kind of hard to find. Some of them are kind of rare. I'm trying to learn from my mistakes from the first time you guys came along, and I was like, well, I'm trying to be conscientious and be on a budget, so I'm just gonna get one copy. I'm gonna get one main cover, and then years later, as I'm going on eBay spending $50 for a damn cover I could have gotten originally for much less than that, I've learned my lesson, and I'm just buying them all. Buy them all.
Look, I'll tell you the crazy thing is, when you especially if you work at Marvel, and if you do a book that has variant covers, you're not getting comps of them. Like there's literally been times where I've been out in the wild at a convention or something, and someone walks up, hey, will you sign this? I'm like, what is this? I didn't write this. And then I open, oh, I did. I've never seen this cover. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have mixed feelings about it because the covers that we have are beautiful.
They are.
But but I really feel like how do I put it? I just feel I feel like I feel almost a sense of guilt in for all the fans who have to spend extra money to buy extra copies of the book, right? It's like, to me, there's this almost like communist in me that's like, no, it should be affordable, and so
well, that brings up my next point, because yes, there are various covers. Most of them are at cover price. There are the incentives. The one on the right here is a Peach Momoko. I think it's a 1 in 25, so it costs more. But Sanford Green, who I know is a collector himself, did something I thought was really dope. Your cover A's on this series are interconnected covers, which is just like what he did with the first series. So in essence, if all you can afford, if you're on a budget and all you can afford is one cover, you can get cover A, and the payoff is at the end of the series, you have a set of interconnected covers. That's like a thank you to the fans. So I respect that. It's cool to have the variants, but all you need is cover A.
But I'll tell you, I argue with them about it all the time. I'm like, we do not need the covers that connect. In the end, it's always good, and I'm always happy with it. And someone's talking about the Akira homage cover that's super rare.
I still don't have.
And I have one, right? I only got one, and what I say to people is this: is like, if unless you're such a completist that you absolutely have to have it, don't pay that big money for it, right? Don't pay, like, I know that Akira one, I've seen people asking for up to $1,000 on eBay for it, right? First of all, we don't get any of that money, right?
Like, it's aftermarket.
Yeah, it's aftermarket. We don't get any of that money. And to me, it's like, because I've been in scenarios where someone has had me sign a book for them, and then a week later I see that it's up on eBay, and it's happened with Bitterroot, it happened with Naomi, it happened with these other, and I get it. Yeah, if you can get the money, great. But I also feel like, again, I'm not sure if I can pay rent next month, and someone's selling a copy of Bitterroot for $1,000 on eBay that I'm never going to get a dime of. And I think that's it's you could still sell that copy of Bitterroot with a Akira cover for $100, and you'd still be making money, right? Like that's sort of how I feel about it, which is I stopped being a collector of comics a long time ago. And so the other day I went, or about a week ago, I bought, was it the Power Company, that DC one, which, was the first DC comic I bought in a very long time. And I got it home and I sat it down, and for whatever reason, I sat it in such a way that part of the front cover folded over. And so it it wasn't meant no more, and my first instinct wasn't to run out and buy another copy. I only bought one cover. I bought the cover that Kari Randolph, and I haven't read it yet, but I bought that comic to read it, and chances are pretty good at some point I'll pass it on to somebody else and give it to them. I just am. It's interesting to me because, like, a lot of people that reached out to me opening weekend of when Sinners came out, and they were like, "Man, you need to see Sue Kugler. He stole your idea." And I was like, "Well, first of all, have you seen the movie?" No. And then I would say, "Have you actually read Bitterroot?" And then they go, "No." And so it's amazing to me how many fans we have that actually haven't read the comic. And that's
quote unquote fans.
Yeah, if you don't want to read it, that's fine. If you just want to buy it for the art, that's fine. But it's always an interesting dynamic to me because it may take me, I may buy a comic or a graphic novel. It may take me a month, 2 months, a year to get around to reading it, but I read it. It's like, I can't, this is just how it is. Mr. Walker, will you follow Jim Lee's model and sell your signature for 3 figures to each prop? No, I would never. Oh, I shouldn't say I would never do that, but I don't even charge for my signature now. I do have a policy at conventions, which is if you have more than 3 things that you want me to sign, you have to buy something from me, and that's it. Because there'll always be somebody show up with like a long box, and then you sign all these, and that's the thing too. When they got a lot of copies of one comic, you know what they're gonna do. We had that with Naomi, where it was just like, oh man, it was less than a day when they started turning up on eBay for a ridiculous amount of money. And I just, again, I feel comics are meant to be read. Yeah.
All right. So let's jump into this book.
Yeah.
So where we left off, the squad, the investigators from our unit, the Sangerye unit, has found the Freedom Riders as they're being attacked by the jinoo. Cotton immediately says, "No killing."
Yeah.
And they're asking, well, and the Freedom Riders like, well, why can't we kill these people? These things, they're trying to kill us. What is the thought process here? Why don't they kill the jinoo?
It's pretty simple. It's 1964. The members of the team are all black, and once you kill a jinoo and they revert back to their human form, it's a dead white person.
Right.
And that's the ultimate reason. That's why they don't do the killing. And it was the same part of that was really the same reason back in the 20s during their first, volumes that we did, the first arc. But it's also this it's what separates us from them. Now, what you see is this particular arc progresses is there's more people willing to kill him than, even though they're saying don't kill him. And you see this issues 2, 3, and 4. You start to see like everybody in the field team. These are the folks in the uniform. There's Cotton, there's Sandra, and there's a character named Joseph. They're all like, why not? Let's just do this. And we're going to get more into that. We're going to get more into and there's a lot of little things that we drop, a lot of little things that we refer to. They're constantly talking about something that happened in Alabama a year earlier, and like we're not going to get into the great details of what happened in Alabama. Spoiler alert: we're not going to talk about it in this particular arc, but it was terrible, right? And it was. The black folks got blamed for it. The Sangerye family got blamed for it. The critical response team, which is who you're looking at here, they all get blamed for it. And so we're sowing the seeds for that now. But a lot of what I took, the inspiration where it came from is like when you look at things like the bombing of Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. Up until very recently, they were calling that a race riot. And if you study American history, nearly every race riot that involves black people started with an act of violence against Black people, either by the police or a white mob. And it's the reality is they were Black massacres. They were either Black massacres by white folks, or they were uprisings, protests of, but they weren't riots. They weren't. There's words are weapons, or at best they're tools, right? And so, it's one thing to call something a riot. Oh, the Watts riots. Well, what caused the Watts riots? Like, let's really break that down and look at that. And so, knowing that, I more than anyone wanted to play with that. And so that idea of no killing is also becomes a metaphor more than anything else for what was going on during the civil rights movement. Not that there was a question of killing, but there was a question of nonviolence versus, self-defense. We'll call it self-defense.
Because they're not soldiers. I mean, you cleverly call them the critical response team,
Yes.
critical race theory team. They're more first responders than they are soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is actually rescuing. Their ammunition is cures, right? Rather than what's to kill them. It's we're shooting you with the cure.
Yeah. But as we start to find out, does the cure really work? And this was something that as a team we've been talking about, and it's been a conversation for a very long time. Can you cure racism?
Right.
And I can tell you what my answer is, and I can tell you that my answer is impacting how I approach Bitterroot moving forward. And so what you see with the critical response team is that debate that was really going on, we simplify it now. We talk about, either Malcolm X or MLK. I see it right here. The eclectic blurred's niche says, will there be two camps within the family to mirror MLK and Malcolm's ideology? Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, it's already there. It's already been there, and it's growing. And what we're seeing, part of what we're seeing in this new arc is the evolution of the jinoo, and is the evolution of what happens when these things go unchecked. And I just said to somebody today, I said, when you look at the history of the United States, the day the United States was formed, right? The day we stopped being a British colony, the Revolutionary War's over, and we're an independent nation, and boom, 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 we immediately started telling lies, and we started creating our own history, right? Rewriting history. So much so that over the course of the next several years after Declaration of Independence is declared, the Constitution is written, and slavery is never mentioned in the Constitution. It's when you look back at history, they called it the peculiar institution.
Yes.
So much so that here we are 200 something years later, and we still don't want to admit, well, when I say we, I ain't talking about us, but you know who I'm talking about, don't want to admit that slavery was as bad as it was. But there's some people that don't want to even admit that it existed. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to play with here, what Chuck's trying to play with here, what Sanford's trying to play with here. And this idea that you're up against an enemy that will not hesitate to kill you. What do you do? What do you do? And there's I want to say it was a scene in maybe it was Selma. I can't remember what movie it was in, where they're talking about the idea of armed resistance against white folks, and somebody just breaks down the numbers, and it's like there's more of them and they got more guns than us. So what do you do? How do you and that this isn't, you don't, I do believe that you can't destroy hate with more hate. I do believe that on a personal level.
Right.
And I want to bring some of that to what these guys are going through, and what they're going to go through. They're going to go through hell over the next few issues. So,
right. So, talked about you can't fight hate with hate.
Yeah.
This was a powerful page. For those who don't remember or know, governors of when the Civil Rights Act was coming about.
Yeah.
And this is that time period. A year later, of the Civil Rights Act. This is 1964. We're having the United States government, particularly under Kennedy, finally dealing with Jim Crow in the South, and the pushback and the use of the federal government to enforce integration into the South. And the governors of these individual states are pushing back on that. Most famously, Bull Connor of down there in Alabama is one of the most famous ones.
Yes.
We have this one, Governor Garnett, here in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Was this based on a particular person, or?
He's sort of an amalgam of all of them, but definitely there's some Bull Connor in him.
He looks like
segregation now, segregation forever, and which, by the way, it's never been 100% confirmed. But I just got to throw this out there. I can't remember the writer's name, but he famously wrote a novel called The Outlaw Josie Wales, which was turned into a movie starring Clint Eastwood. And the rumor, the legend is that writer, whatever his name is, wrote that speech for Bull Connor. And he was, when you do the research on the guy who wrote The Outlaw Josie Wales, he was a horrific racist. He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And so now I'm torn every time I watch The Outlaw Josie Wales, which I shouldn't be that torn by or that surprised by, because he was a Confederate.
He's a Confederate. Yeah.
Asa Earl Carter. There you go. So yeah, this Bobby Lee Garnett is an amalgam of all these Southern politicians that were very like, let's keep, we're going to stay segregated. And there was actually a coalition. I can't remember the name of the coalition. There was a coalition of Southern governors that came together and said, we're actively going to fight this. And even the article in the back of this issue, which I know we'll talk about, gets into like the lengths that they went to keep Jim Crow, to keep segregation legalized. I mean, at the end of the day, and I have no qualms about saying this, right? In Alabama, they blew up a church and killed 4 little girls.
Yeah.
That's how much they hate us, right? And their children and grandchildren, who are now adults and in positions of power, some of them still hate us that much.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are we supposed to do with that? How do you? Yeah. So
you summarize in 2 panels that hate.
Yeah.
Right. You took various speeches from, and you summarized it in 2 panels. And it's like, I kind of like almost want to view it from a lens of kids coming up today, and they would read this and go, well, that seems so crazy and far-fetched. And it's like, actually, it's not. I mean, let me just read this. How can we let them vote? Let me do my Southern. How can we let them vote? How can we let their children go to school with our children when we know what they are? They may look human, but they're something else. They're not like us, Kendrick. They're not created by the same God that made us in his image. Negroes were made by the devil. God chose us, his children, to rule over them. You summarized white supremacy in 2 panels.
Well, I think that if you're old enough and you've been around long enough in this country, you should be able to. I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to sum it up in 1 panel, to be honest with you. But I wanted to, this is the thing. Other than the line where he says that Negroes were made by the devil. You're right. All this comes from various speeches. They're documented. Look, here's the thing. When you study the history of the Civil War in the 1860s, when you talk about the Civil War now, everybody says it was over states' rights. Okay. Yeah. Here's the thing. I have literally read the articles of secession for every single state in the Confederacy. I've read them. It's documented history. every single state that left the Union, formed the Confederate States of America, and went to war against the Union, every single one of them said, it's so we can keep slavery. That's
Mhm.
what it was over, right? And so, like, I'm not going to shy away from showing how truly evil these folks are. And if someone doesn't like it, that's their problem. Tough titty, you know.
I live in Florida, where our governor is told his Secretary of Education to promote the idea that, well, you know, the Negro slaves learned valuable job skills as
Yeah.
slaves that they were able to use after slavery. They should be thanking us. It's
Yes. Yes. No.
Florida. Florida's
Or that,
wild.
I mean, that they call us, that they call our ancestors, our relatives, immigrants. We weren't immigrants. Some of us were. Some of us are the descendants of immigrants, right? But most of us, most Black Americans aren't. And I just feel, I feel really. I'm a history nerd. I love history,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like I'm gonna give you some history, and everything I write, I try to give you a little bit of history.
Keep doing it, brother. That's one of the things that I love about your writing.
Thank you.
I love the edutainment factor in your writing. Absolutely
That's the
fantastic.
ARS one in me, right? You know.
Yeah.
So
All right. So Meriah is now working with the feds. She, for all
mhm.
intents, is she actually a Fed herself, or has she just been? Explain to me the dynamics of this, because she's got these two agents. The guy with the glasses she gets along with fine. The other dude with the Superman curl, not so much.
Okay, so there's what's called the critical response team, and they are deputized agents that are working with the government, and it's mostly the Sangerye family, but
Yeah,
it's an offshoot of what they used to do when we first met them 30, 40 years ago. Um, and they're the president of the United States. We never come out and say if it's Johnson or not. It would have been Lyndon Johnson at this point. We don't
yeah,
come out and say if it's him, but the president has formed this sort of task force that's meant to, in theory, investigate and control the Inzando. Now, for anyone who's listening that hasn't read Bitterroot, there's two types of monsters. There's the jinoo, which are white people, and then there's the Inzando, which are black folks. And this is only a mild spoiler. As the story progresses, we come to find out that there's this lie that has been told to the American people, which is the jinoo were cured. The jinoo were cured in the late 1940s, early 50s. After the outbreak of World War II, in which Germany was overrun by the jinoo, right? Like this, they had a different name there. And so what we're getting into in this story arc is that, do the jinoo exist or not? And the bottom line is, where the line that's being sold by the U.S. government, and especially in the South, there's no more jinoo. Remember that scene in Sinners where he says, "There ain't no clan no more." It's that sort of thing. And so Meriah is the head of the critical response team, and therefore she has she has a lot of power. Now the other two guys there, York and Steele. York is the one with the glasses. Steele is the one with the Superman swirl and the Bruce Campbell chin. Um, they work for, we just call them the Bureau. We never
yeah,
come out and say for sure if it's the FBI or not, but it's essentially the FBI. And the Bureau and the critical response team are supposed to work together, but the Bureau agents are supposed to answer to the critical response team. And that ain't going well, because the head of the critical response team is Meriah Manigo.
yeah. Um, I like how she definitively says. I love how Sanford did this,
Yeah.
where her head sort of cocked to the side.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's pointing. She's got her hand akimbo so on her side, and she's like, "This is my operation,"
Yes.
and
I,
it's just a powerful image.
I've fallen in love with her. I've fallen in love with her so much. and I wasn't expecting to. You know, when you start out, at least when I do, when I start out writing a project, something like, especially like this, which has a large cast, it's sort of like, okay, let's see where they go. But Meriah really quickly was like, because I love Berg so much too.
Yeah.
But Meriah is really, she is not so much my grandmother and my great aunties as she is like some of my older cousins and my aunties, that like the generation, like my dad's generation. She's very much that, like I grew up with those women, like they were like my big sisters or my, you know, my cousins, um and they were the women who I was always kind of scared of, because there was something tough about them. They weren't masculine or anything like that, but they just knew how to stand their ground. And so as I was developing Meriah with Chuck, um, I was looking at really at Fannie Lou Hamer. I was looking at Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells goes back a generation or two earlier, but I was looking at the women from the movement, and you know, historically we don't talk about women from the movement as much. We always will talk about Martin Luther King or Ralph Abernathy or Medgar Evers, but we don't really talk about the women. And it was the same with the Black Panther Party. But when you really start doing the research or just talking to people, like women held it down.
Yeah.
They did so much of the heavy lifting, and I wanted to show that, and I felt that the fact that we had Berg became a father at the end of that last arc, it made perfect sense to have his daughter be, you know, the new head of the team, along with Blink, who's now like the aging matriarch. Blink ain't supposed to go out into the field anymore, and so yeah.
I also get the feeling Mariah and York are gonna get closer for some reason. I get the impression. She also has Enoch
Yeah,
with her as part of the
yeah.
team, who's getting accosted by these white ruffian guys. And you got
They're
Buford T. Justice.
yeah, God-fearing citizens is who they are.
You gonna let this uppity coon talk to me this way? God. Buford T. Justice guy, sheriff, is kind of just. I mean, it's. I want to say it's almost a trope, except if anyone who's ever been to the South has met a sheriff like this,
Yeah.
they're real. Like,
Yeah.
these are real guys. You know,
And you know who he's based on, honestly? He's like the evil version of the character that this actor Clifton James played in two different James Bond movies. He played Sheriff J.W. Pepper.
yes.
He's the evil version of that, right? He's
Live,
like
live and let die, and
Man with the Golden Gun. Yeah.
and Man with the Golden. Yes.
Yeah.
Same. Perfect.
Yeah. And I just, you know, like, where would we be without him? And he has to be like the fat slob, and he has to be, you know, just truly evil, and you know, and like, I'm having fun writing these people, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I watched a movie. It was a bootleg DVD of a movie the other day. The movie came out in the 80s called Enemy Territory. It stars Ray Parker Jr., Tony Todd, and it's like, it is what it is, man. It's like this ridiculous film, and I was watching it with my lady, and she'd never seen it before, and I leaned over to her and I said, the thing I like about this movie is no black folks had a say in any of the dialogue, right? And it was like, black folks don't talk this way. They the only type of black people that talk this way are black people in movies that white people wrote, white people who don't know black people, or black people who think they have to prove that they're black by talking this way, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of doing the reverse, right? I'm writing these racist white characters that are like, the difference is, yeah, I actually know people who talk this way. I've met them.
Exactly. That's what I said. It's not. It would. You would think, oh, this is just a trope. But it's like, no, there's people that actually talk like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute facts. All right. So tell me about the dynamic, because that's got to be crazy. Because she's head of this critical response team. She's got the guys from the bureau answering to her. They're going into local areas. Hierarchy wise, she outranks everybody.
Yeah.
And she's immediately running into conflict with all these sheriffs. Is that going to be explored more as the story goes on, like how she interacts with these?
There's going to be some more explanation of it in this arc. It's I don't know when our schedule is going to be like after issue 5 of this drops. There's more stuff that's gonna that I hope we will be able to do in the following in the arcs that come. I was really working to make this arc issue 5 end. I talk about this all the time with my students. It's like you make a choice. You either have an ending that's A New Hope, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, or you have an ending that's Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. And I was like, I hit this moment. It was like halfway through issue 3 where I was like, this is going to probably end more Empire Strikes Back than A New Hope.
Oh damn! There's going to be bodies.
You know? I don't know if it'll quite get that bad. I'm wrapping up the issue now, and in fact I talked to Sanford about this yesterday, and I said, look, man, I got to be honest with you. I don't think I can do this in 22 pages. I said, how many more pages do you have in you? Could I do 24? Could I do 26? And he said, if you need to, go 24. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to do it in 22. And so we'll see. There's some tricks that I was able to make happen in issue 3. And so we'll see what happens. But for Meriah, it's this. I want to establish her as the badass that we see her before we bring her low, before we knock her feet out from under her, and then she has to rise up. That's what great heroes do, right? They rise to the occasion after being knocked down, and she's from a family. When you really think about this, she's from a family that has lost so much, and we start getting into that in issue 3 and 4. So for the old readers who've read all the other issues of Bitterroot, there's going to be some payoffs coming in issues 3, 4, and to a certain extent 5, that connects this series more to the original series.
Nice.
For the new readers, it was trying to craft it in such a way that if you haven't read the other issues, it's still going to make sense. And so what we're seeing is Meriah is at a critical point where she's the one who sees it like it is, just like Blink saw it the way it was 30 years earlier, right? And Meriah has a level of power that Blink never had, and Blink has power now too, because Blink runs everything from headquarters in Harlem. But still, with all that power, like a lot of that power is an illusion, and they can give us all the power we ask for, and it still doesn't make a difference, right? We fought to have the right to vote, to ride in the front of the bus, to go to school wherever we wanted to own our own homes, to be safe from unfair prosecution. We in theory, we won all of those rights, but do we have them, right? And that's part of what I'm trying to get at, what Chuck is trying to get at, what Sanford's trying to get at.
And there's something to be said about being given power rather than taking the power.
Yeah. Oh, wait till you get to number 4.
I like where this is going. All right. The other thing you mentioned is, the cure is not necessarily working anymore.
Yeah.
And the jinoo seem to have evolved. Like, they're chatty.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you've got this snarling beast. It's easy to shoot some snarling beast with teeth it kind of freaks you out when the snarling beast is like, "Sup?"
But also, I don't know if anyone caught this. You look at that first panel, and that's a deputy's badge
Yeah.
that thing is wearing. And I'll give him his flowers for this because he ain't on here, but this sequence, this was Chuck. Chuck brought this to the fold. He put this in issue 2, and in doing that, this idea that he had, and how we were talking about how what they use to quote unquote cure the jinoo, how it doesn't work, the way he crafted this scene, and then Joseph, who's a member of the critical response team, his response to it, this was all Chuck, and it really shaped everywhere that we went after issue 2. Issue 3, 4, and 5 took a somewhat drastic turn from a story standpoint, because at the last minute Chuck came up with this. Just like Chuck doesn't say anything and he's doesn't come on podcasts and he doesn't talk about a lot of these things, but he'll throw out some of these ideas and these scenes and these characters, and then it's like, okay, let's massage it, let's make it work, let's figure out a way to give this connective tissue. And so in this particular moment, it's a jinoo acknowledging that, like, yo, I know what you're trying to do, but it don't work, right? And then Joseph, who's a member of the team, like loses his cool, and we discover, oh, Joseph's an Inzondo, right? And the theory, or the way I'm trying to build it, and whether or not Chuck and Sanford want to go there doesn't matter to me, is that there's an Inzondo in all of us. If you're Black, being an Inzondo is a metaphor for the trauma of the Black experience in America. And so at any moment, that grief and trauma can be set free.
James Baldwin said to be Black and conscious is to know,
is to be in a constant state of anger.
Constant state of anger and rage, right? So yeah, there's an Inzondo in all of us.
Yeah.
Assuming you have some level of consciousness. All right. Deep stuff, man. Deep stuff. This is why I don't need too many panels from your book.
Yeah.
Because it's so freaking layered, man. Every panel is like bars. Y'all got bars. So we talked about, the no kill rule. Then this character comes along looking like Iron Man Generation 1 met the Punisher.
Sanford will be so happy to hear that, because when we were talking about this, he's like, well, this is the armor is based on the first generation of Iron Man. And I was like, yeah, I didn't even catch it.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it looks like. With the Stormtrooper helmet. And then he's just like, I'm just gonna murk dudes left and right.
Yeah.
Y'all taking too much time. Like, it's done.
Yeah.
I didn't want to reveal who this character is. I tried not to be too spoilery in this episode.
Yeah.
But what can you tell us about this?
Oh, you want me to spoil it? Is what?
No, I don't just spoil it. I'm just, what's the significance of this character without saying who it is?
This is a character. This is a character. I can say this. This is a character from the original 3 volumes. He's a supporting character through the remainder of this series. We reveal who he is in this issue. I think on this page. And then in issues 3, 4, and 5, we see we get an idea that there's something way different about him. And one of the things is that he hasn't really aged in 30 years. And we do talk about that a little bit later. And he represents, ultimately, if there's going to be the classic MLK versus Malcolm X, ideological split, he's the embodiment of it. And he's the one who says, these things can't be cured. We've been trying for years, can't cure them. Let's just kill them. Right. And he's the one, that would say, yeah, why don't we just go out and do this? And everyone else is kind of like, there's not enough guns and there's not enough of us. but what we see starting in issue 2 after this character has been revealed, is that like the vast majority of everybody agrees with him. And by when I say the vast majority of everybody, I'm talking the critical response team. The only one who doesn't agree with him is Blink. And Blink has known this character for a very long time because they knew each other in the original series. But everybody else is kind of like, oh, I'm glad he's here. Because if he wasn't here, we'd all be dead. Because he's the guy, and this is and what he represents, he doesn't represent Malcolm X so much as people want to think. I let people say that. What he really represents are the deacons of defense. And I don't know if you know who the deacons of defense were, but they were, I want to say they were primarily out of Louisiana, but I could be wrong because I don't always get my facts right. But the deacons of defense were a group of brothers, all church-based, and they were the reason why the nonviolent movement was able to be so successful. There's never pictures of the deacons of defense with their shotguns in the same pictures with the leaders of the SLCC and places like that. But they were really like, they were the ones that were like, okay, someone has to pick up arms. And when you look at like Robert F. Williams and then eventually the Black Panther Party, these were all people, they weren't picking up arms to kill anybody. They were picking up arms to defend. And so this particular character is like very much like, I'm here to defend, but and we get into this, it's like, how do you defend yourself against this monstrosity,
right?
These creatures, and it's like, well, yeah, you kill him.
And he's not doing it. And I guess the conceit is that he's not doing it to be out of bloodlust or being bloodthirsty. It's more a pragmatic. This is a practical solution to this problem.
Yeah.
And I like this comment from 1-100 comment podcast. Our boy Amir, shout out to Amir. Check out his podcast. Am I the only one starting to thinking about every bitter root, every era Bitterroot could go to after reading this issue? When you started talking about World War II, which would have happened, a decade before this, and I started thinking, God, that was the War of the Ages, like, what was happening with the Sangerye or with these jinoo during World War II? That is a storyline I would love to see at some point in the future.
I would love to see, we talk about this all the time. I would really like to see us expand this in a similar way to like what Mike Mignola did with Hellboy. I think Hellboy is an amazing series. And part of what I'm doing in this particular arc, and I'm making sure that we do this, is that we plant enough seeds that every character in this, first off, every character in the original run could get a solo series, right? But like this cat who you see right here in the armor, I have an idea for, at the very least, a one-shot just about him. Cotton, who we see standing off to that character's right, Cotton should get his own series, right? Because Cotton was there at the end of issue 15. He's there in Germany. He helps liberate the concentration camps, right? I would like to see us doing more of that. And when I say us, not just myself, Chuck, and Sanford, I'd like for us to get to a point where we could bring in other creators and oversee that sort of thing.
Yes.
Whether or not that's going to happen, I honestly, anyone who's listening to this episode, like, really needs to voice that you'd love to see it, and then get behind it, so that because I think it's a tough sell, in part for just ego, right? Like, how, like, can I let go of these characters enough to let someone else write them? And we've talked about this, Chuck, myself, Sanford, and I was like, we don't have to create every story. we just oversee the stories. We serve as the editors and the publishers, and if something doesn't work for us, we can say no, we're not going to do that. But
You guys kind of did that with the Red Hot Summer special.
with the Red Summer special, Red Summer special, and where we wrote all of the stories, and those were written. Some were written just by me, some were written just by Chuck, and then there was the ones that we wrote together. But we brought in different artists for all of that, and I think that, you know, I loved how that one came out, and I feel this is, I don't want to get up on a high horse or anything, but I feel that we as a team are in a unique position that most Black comic creators don't find themselves in, which is we're in a position that we could give work to other creators and help cultivate a new generation of talent, right? We're never going to be Milestone or anything like that, but we could easily get some people work, people that are maybe ready to be working, but they, for whatever reason, Marvel or DC hasn't hired them, or there's some people out there who, I hate to say it, come across as being past their prime, right? But I would love to have a guy like Larry Stroman draw a story for us. I would love to have, I would love to have Arvell Jones do a cover or two for us. I mean, these cats are still out there, and they're still holding it down. Ron Wilson is still out there.
Daryl Banks,
yeah, and that's just. I want to be very careful how I say this. That's just the Black creators, because there's some white creators out there too that I would kill to, like, man.
Bill Sienkiewicz.
If I could get Howard Chaykin to do a cover, just a cover, right? And I don't know why Sanford hasn't approached him. Or maybe he has. Maybe Chaykin isn't. And I'm terrified to reach out to Howard Chaykin. I've met him a couple times.
Chaykin's done a lot of stuff with like period piece stuff that would be perfect.
Yeah,
for this.
And I just and I'm a huge fan of his. And Butch Geist just passed away a couple days ago.
Yeah,
and most of the artists that I grew up on are either gone or retired, right? Michael Golden doesn't do comics anymore, and Walt Simonson's retired, and Chaykin is one of the only people that's really active, and I don't have the nerve to reach out to him, right? I may be doing a there's Sam.
Man. Look, the chat's giving you names like Al Ewing
is like,
writing.
I only know Al in passing. We've met a couple times, met at a Marvel editorial retreat. I love Al Ewing's writing. I would love to see what Al Ewing does, but I'd also love to see what someone like Eve Ewing, who I think is a great writer, no relation. I'd love to see what she could do with some of
another name that came up. Eclectic Blurting Each is one of my favorite people over in this chat. Sherilyn Eaton.
Oh,
that sister, man, that sister can write. Good God, she's not getting enough accolades. Yeah, she can write. I don't know why Marvel has not given her the reins to Black Panther, which she has more than proven she deserves.
Yeah,
but give that woman some work.
Yeah. And so I just would, I think, and again, this is more of a me up on my soapbox, me up on a me on my high horse, but we're incredibly fortunate as a team. We've enjoyed a level of success that not a lot of comic creators of any stripe have, and I would just like to see that. We everybody sort of looks to Milestone as being the hope for talent to break in and catch a break, and that's that. There's a little bit of that, but Milestone's always going to be mired by their relationship to DC and Warner Brothers, who are only going to let so many people do so many things, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. But I mean, if I could, I would love to get, if not covers, pinups, or better yet, short stories. Man, Chaykin doing a 4-page Bitterroot story, Kyle Baker doing a 4-page Bitterroot story. Could you imagine?
Let's talk about this seriously, Dave. I mean, I mentioned this before. You did the Red Summer special.
Yeah.
why can't we do another one? There's got to be a Red Summer special too. Summertime stuff always happens. Talk about the civil rights era.
Yeah.
Stuff always popped off in the summer. Let's do
You
a
know
Red
what?
Summer special too.
Okay, so Sanford's on here. What I would propose is, because I want to believe it was the summer of '67 that they called um, the long hot summer of 1967, because there were so many riots, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
I wouldn't be opposed to us doing another one shot that was similar to the Red Summer special, but we call it, the summer of '67 or something like that.
There you go.
And
32 pages.
yeah, and so,
Anthology.
but again, it's, making comics ain't easy. It definitely ain't easy work. But I also would like to see us do. I mean, we get all this great fan art coming in, and it's like, I like, we should be posting that. We should be sharing it. We should do a special, like a portfolio. Back in the '80s, they would do these portfolios where you would get like 12 prints and you could hang them, and it would be, I remember there was an X-Men one, and there was a bunch of like, all these indie comics had them, and I was like, oh, I would love to see that. I would love to see some really serious pinups that don't necessarily make it as covers, but make it as I mean, our characters are, they're beautiful to look at. So where to submit fan art? There is nowhere to submit fan art. That's the thing. It's people post it on Instagram or Facebook, and then they tag us. And it's interesting, because I think about that a lot. I think about, like, how do I help other artists just get their stuff seen out there?
Do you guys have a Bitterroot social media account?
Oh yeah, we had a, there was a Twitter, there's a Facebook, and there might be an Instagram, but we're terrible about that, right? We're terrible about posting stuff, and as a team, we're also trying to, like, make our own things happen. And I've often said, if we pooled our financial resources just a little bit, we could hire somebody to do some of this stuff for us, and then it would grow exponentially. Like, there was a time when we were talking about potentially doing a Bitterroot Patreon. And this was after, remember when Substack was doing all that comic stuff?
Right.
And I was like, we talked about, like, how do we create stuff to tide people over when Sanford's off doing his stuff at Marvel or wherever he's doing stuff, or Chuck's doing his stuff, where I'm doing my stuff. And how do we keep, because if it's just the three of us, and we're doing what we're doing, the reality is like, we ain't getting rich off of this, right? Most people don't get rich off of image books. The pay structure, there ain't no pay structure, and so, like, how do we get ourselves into a situation where I think about this all the time. I think about this on my career as a whole. How do I get myself into a situation where I'm generating revenue for myself, and then generate enough revenue to hire people to draw stories, or to color stories, or to, the death of Bobby Hart, which I was talking about the last time I was on here, man, we're going to print probably next week. And man, I shouldn't be designing the back cover of any book. I'm no good at that, but I also don't have the money to hire somebody who is good at it. And I'm no offense, but there's certain things where I would rather do it myself, and know that I can do it competently enough, than to pay somebody who says they can do it, but they can't.
You got a potential employee right here.
Who's this?
Eclectic Birdie Niche wants to know how they can apply to be your social media guy. Honestly, you're a professor. Like, get extra credit, man. Give somebody an internship to run the social media accounts.
So it's funny, because I hired a former student of mine to basically do that, to help me run my stuff. Great kid. She wasn't up for the challenge, and that's the thing. I will never work with anyone who's volunteering their time with me again. and it's
Mm.
not meant to be an offense, but I say, if I'm not in a position where I can actually fire somebody, I don't want to hire anybody, So, um, and it's difficult. It really is, because a lot of people don't understand how Image Comics works. Image Comics, you create the comic, you give it to Image. They do not give you any money. They print the comic, they publish it, they send it out, and then if your comic makes enough money, then you get royalties after
Oh,
after you get after they earn back their investment.
they're
And the
investing.
investments are never that big. Now, that's not how every single comic that Image works puts out works, because there's some comics where they're getting some people are getting in advance. I'm sure that like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips get in advance because they're some of the best sellers. That Brian K.
Right.
Vaughan probably gets an advance on Saga. I've never talked to these guys, so I don't know for sure. But um, it's the other day. It was the 1st of May, and I was like, oh, thank God May is here. Royalty checks are going to be coming out, right? And so it's like, yeah, we'll get our royalty checks, but unless more people start buying the trade paperbacks or the compendium, that's where the real money comes from. And so, but that's money split 3 ways, and then it's then we gotta you know hopefully, and we're good about making sure that the people that work for us, the colorist, the letterer, the editor, that they're getting broken off a piece too as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. So pre-order your books, people. Pre-order your books.
That is the reason why pre-ordering is so crucial. People don't realize it. And the thing is when you work for Marvel or DC, you only get royalties if you hit a threshold, if you sell a certain number of units.
Yeah,
And the vast majority of comics don't sell that many units, right? And you only have 1 month to sell that number of units, right?
right.
So at Marvel, I want to say the threshold is like 40,000 units or something like that. Well, you only have a month or however long that issue is being solicited. After you've written, Son of Satan versus Howard the Duck, issue 1, by the time issue 2 comes out, there's no more opportunities to make money off of issue 1. Then you have to hope that the trade paperback collection makes enough money. And the big lie that everyone tells you is, oh, the money in digital comics. And there ain't no money in digital comics. Like I whenever I get a royalty statement, the first thing I look to do is I look to see, okay, how much royalties came from digital sales. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna buy a loaf of bread with that,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the digital is more about promotion than anything else.
It
You said,
is.
well, what do you tide the fans over in between projects? Well, you can, if you set up a Patreon or a Substack, you can say, if you contribute to our Patreon and Substack, we're going to release 1 page every periodically.
Yeah.
And you'll have exclusive access to that digital page.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And like I shameless self-promotion. I've started a Patreon. I'm still figuring it out, man. This is like, it's like trying to speak, ancient Aramaic most of the time. But part of what I'm trying to do is, like, one of the things I'm going to do, I haven't done it yet, is I'm going to post a handful of original short stories that I've written, and like 8 to 10 page short stories. Just put them up there and tell people, if you want to draw it, that's fine. You have to, you get to draw it, and I will at some point, I'll post them on my Patreon. People get to see them. It'll be your art, and if it's really good, at some point I'm going to print it and I will pay you for what you did. But because I get people all the time asking me, oh, will you send me one of your Power Man and Iron Fist scripts, or will you send me a Nighthawk script so I can practice drawing? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I won't do that, because you can't do anything with those pages. But I will send you something that I've written that you can do anything with, except you can't make movies out of it. You can't sell the rights to it, but no one's ever going to come after you. I'm never going to come after you, as long as you respect that copyright. And and the scripts that I'm putting together are so non-Marvel, so non-DC, but they're like, they show that you know how to tell a story,
Yeah.
and that's what people really want to see. So
Right.
it's crazy, and it's a crazy industry. And I like, as I'm trying to make this Patreon work, I'm like, yo, I don't know how other people do it. I follow some other creators on there, and it's like, um, you know, but one of the things I'd really like to see is, like, I'm trying to figure out how to highlight and support young artists, or even older or established artists, and let people, hey, go check this person out. You're People are going to see, starting this month. I've already started posting new things, but starting this month, like, people are really going to see what the Patreon's about. And there's right now it's mostly older content, but there's some new content coming. I'm posting PDFs of the scripts I've written for other publishers, and the key thing is, I'm only publishing or making available the first drafts. Right, that way you can see how much stuff has changed. You can find comics on a torrent site or something, and compare Shaft #1 to the script to the final comic, which I just posted the script to Shaft #1 on the Patreon. So
That's what's up. I think social media is kind of the thing that you guys are gonna have to do to bridge the gap, because there is that disparity. We
yeah,
talk about it all the time in a space. There are certain creators that can walk into a publisher's office and say, "I have an idea for a book," and they pull out a blank check and say, "Please write
yeah,
whatever you like, and you have as much time as you like and as many issues as you like." But for the vast majority of creators, it's just not the case. And particularly when you're doing independent books, the marketing, promotion, the onus of that often comes onto you. Um, and
and
so,
it's brutal.
yeah, it's brutal.
Like, I would say this to there's some people that are better at it, but, like, I don't have a TikTok account. I don't want to go on to TikTok. I left Twitter a long time ago. I have Blue Sky, but I don't go on there that often. And like, I like to sit down and have coffee with people, right? I don't even like text messaging. I know
Yeah,
I got to do some of this stuff, and I'm trying to figure it out. And again, the thing is like, um, I when I hire somebody, I want to pay them, right? I want to pay them. But what if I can't pay you, right? If I don't get a gig in the next couple months, I'm not no, there's no money coming in, so I can't necessarily pay you. And I had that issue with an artist that I hired them to do some work, and I said, you need to have this work done in the next 6 months, because over the next 6 months, I have the money to pay you. And that was like 8 months ago, and now they're coming at me going, "Hey, man, I need some money." And I was like, "Yeah, but you haven't finished, you barely started this thing. I told you I was going to run out of money, and now I'm out of it. And it's not that I'm out of money, I'm going to be homeless. It's like, no, I'm out of that money that I was going to pay you, right? It was earmarked, So yeah,
for those who are been asking, a lot of people in the chat, a lot of your people, your supporters, people that enjoy your work, about Patreon. Here's his Patreon on the screen. Please feel free to support his Patreon, but also support this Bitterroot book by pre-ordering
yeah.
the book. We will say that all day on this channel. Pre-order the books of the creators that you love, so they can keep making the books that you love with the characters that you love. That's one of the easiest things that you can do. And honestly, it's cheaper to pre-order your books than it is to buy them on Wednesday when you walk into the store, because oftentimes these LCSs will give you a discount for pre-ordering your books. I get 30% off for pre-ordering. I don't know where y'all
And
shop.
and this is crucial. This is really crucial, because a lot of times people don't understand how it really works. Um, is if a lot of comic shops across the country aren't carrying Bitterroot. They don't
Mm,
carry Bitterroot because either the owner isn't a fan, or they don't think it's going to be able to sell. And so
yeah,
if you don't ask for it, um, you know, Bitterroot #1, the next movement #1 came out the same day that Hush 2 came out.
yeah,
And the retailers spent all their money on Batman Hush 2. That's where all their money went. I was shocked at how many copies of Bitterroot we moved. Um, But what a lot of people don't understand is that comics are non-returnable. So when a comic book store has, whether it's an issue of Bitterroot or an issue of Batman, they have bought that issue. They own it.
Right.
And they will always buy something that they believe they can sell easily. And I've talked to retailers who are like, "Oh yeah, Bitterroot's good, but I don't think my customers will like it." Right? It's like, well,
Right.
why don't you think your customers will like it? I don't want to get into that one, but why? If you liked it, buy an extra copy, or why don't you hand it to, I mean, my local comic shop. I've got a couple of them, but there's one that I go to, and I get mad at these dudes because I will walk in and they'll be like, "Oh, we got something for you." I'm like, I wasn't even. I was only here to buy one little thing today, and they're like, "Nope, check this out." Like they know me, and they're always looking for, like, they know me as a customer, so they know that I really, hey, I'm not that into whatever Batman All In has got going on, but they'll hand me some independent stuff. They'll hand me, God, I can't even remember the title of it now, but there was an Image title that they handed me, and I was like, all right, we'll see. I bought it, and I was like, yo, wait a sec, this is really good. This is what we want our retailers to do, but a lot of them don't do that. So
I love comments like this. Gonna teach a comics class in fall, and Bitterroot was on the syllabus and reading list. And you
well, I
and
know
you
John Jennings teaches it, so that's always good.
you know why that is. This is I talk about this all the time with Bitterroot. It's edutainment. The care and craft that you put into every single page is incredible, and you guys know what you're doing because at the end of each of these issues, there's more.
Yeah.
You could have just done a letters page or something, but you decide to educate. Um, you have here a couple things. First, with Dr. Ronaldo Anderson talking about the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. I've never heard of this before,
Neither did I.
and I
Right.
consider myself a pretty well educated guy, and I've literally never heard of this before.
Yeah.
Um,
It
I
was.
love the fact that you guys do this. Talk about this.
Yeah, no, so John Jennings curates the bitter truths, the back matter, and John is originally from Mississippi. And when I told him, when I said, that we're coming back, will you do the back matter? He said yes. I said, I was trying to call this arc, we call it the next movement. I fought tooth and nail to call it Mississippi Burning. And but I told John, I was like, yeah, it takes place in Mississippi. And he said, let's have every edition of Bitter Truths have something to do with Mississippi. And I
Right.
was like, okay. And he's and as a Mississippian, I mean, John is one of the smartest people I know. He's incredibly talented. And he's
Super
like,
smart.
let's talk about all the things that Mississippi has, because there's the positive too. But he calls me up one day and he tells me about the Sovereignty Commission. This was literally 3-4 months ago. He was like, have you ever heard of this? And I was like, nope. And he's like, neither have I. And I'm from Mississippi. And then I was like, I don't know if we can work this into the story as it is, because we're pretty far along. And he was like, don't worry, we're gonna, Ronaldo's gonna do a piece on it. I'm playing with, like how to get the Sovereignty Commission in. It ain't gonna happen in this arc. But if we do another arc, when we do another arc, I think that they'll be equivalent to them showing up.
But even if you don't weave it into the story, I mean, your story takes place in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And these things you do in the back, you call them the bitter truths, right?
Yeah.
It gives context and flavor to the story. Like after I've read the comic and I go to your bitter truths, it makes it resonate more when you say, well, here's what actually happened.
Yeah.
And it makes what you read fit in an entirely, it sheds a new light on it, and it makes you look through it a different lens. Particularly, you have this other story on the right here about this young DJ from Mississippi, and talk about his story.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting in what he talks about is like a lot of people have preconceptions about what Mississippi is.
Yeah.
They think it's all dirt roads and and blues music, and there's yes, there's that, but there's so much more.
Yeah.
And he tries to dispel all these preconceptions of what Mississippi, modern Mississippi, is. And I wouldn't know that because I think Mississippi, I think of dirt roads and blues music. But there's so much more. Edutainment,
Yeah.
edutainment, as Sanford Green says here, edutainment. That's what makes your book special, and that's why it's resonating to this day. And that's why I think Sanford mentioned you guys sold really well against Hush.
Yeah.
Right, Batman. DC's like 70% of their books is Batman related. You guys sold well against Batman because you have a fan base out there. And you wrote something special. To Eisner's kind of proves that.
Yeah, no, and I just hope, I'd love to build it up, and I'd love to see, when people ask me like what some of my favorite comics and graphic novels are, most of the time it's like most people are like, I've never even heard of that, right? And I'm like, well, that's your problem. It's also the problem of the industry. It's also the problem of the retailers. But it's like, we should be out there looking for more stuff to challenge us, more stuff to entertain us, to edutain us, all of that. And so I love the medium. I got, in the last week, I got 3 books, right? I got Brian Michael Bendis's and Andre Lima, their the 3rd book in their Phenomena installment from Abrams came out. John Jennings, Damian Duffy, and David Brame, their Octavia Butler parable of the I can't remember if it's the sower or the talents. One of the parable books.
The talents. Yeah.
Talents just came out. And so in that case, that's 2 books that are done by people who are like family to me. And then the 3rd book, which just arrived, which is someone I backed on Kickstarter, or not Kickstarter, on Zoop, was Howard Chaykin's adaptation of John Benteen's Fargo books, right?
Mm.
And that was published by a good friend of mine. And it's like all 3 of these are genre in their own way, but they're not superhero genre. And
right.
and it's like just good stuff. But it's like sometimes trying to find that good stuff is like trying to pull teeth.
Yeah. Well, speaking of good stuff.
Yeah.
Issue 3.
Issue 3. Look at that.
We're telling people to pre-order this book. Tell people what they can expect if they pre-order today. I want everybody watching this. If you haven't pre-ordered, I've done a disservice to you. Make sure you pre-order the book. What can fans expect out of issue 3?
What can they expect? And so now this is the crazy thing. I'm trying to remember what happens in issue 3 versus issue 4. You're going to see more of this character who returned from the original series. You're going to see more of that dynamic between the tension between Meriah and Steele, Agent Sherman Steele. You're going to catch a glimpse of like how bad it is in Mississippi at this particular time in history, and you're going to catch the first glimpse of what the next generation of jinoo really look like. You're just going to catch a glimpse of it. We haven't seen it yet. So what attacks the bus in issue 1 and what they're fighting in issue 2, that ain't it. That's traditional jinoo, like with just a little bit of hot sauce on it. We're going to see something different. And we're building towards like this new threat that the family hasn't seen yet. And it's going to be like, terrifying.
I'll tell you what's terrifying. We talked about Rodney Barnes earlier. He wrote this zombie book called 20 Degrees Past Rigor.
Yeah.
It's like it's a zombie book, zombie book, whatever. But what makes it terrifying is when the zombies start talking. And you're like, wait, what? They can talk? They can communicate?
Yeah.
And for some reason, that simple fact makes them that much more terrorizing. So I'm curious to see what you're doing with these talking jinoo.
Yeah, there's I'll tell you this: there's a moment where it's not a spoiler or anything. I was on the phone with Sanford. I think it was yesterday, and I'm trying to wrap up, issue 5. He's done drawing issue 4, so he needs me to finish a couple scenes. And I was like, how do we kill this thing? Like we actually hadn't thought about it. Like, how do we kill this thing? And it's an interesting conundrum to get into when you have when you have a monster or a villain that your heroes don't know what to do with. And
Sanford's
the
telling
only
you,
way you're going to be able,
don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil it. There, you got to get issue 5 to find out. But I will say that, and I feel this way truly. And Sanford's, I didn't say this to him. I don't say nice things to Sanford, usually. I will say that I think Bitterroot number 4 might be the best comic he's ever drawn.
Wow.
And I'm not just talking the best issue. It's definitely the best issue of Bitterroot in my opinion. Issue 4 of the next movement. But I was looking it over the other day. We were, looking over the inks and getting ready to send it off to be lettered and colored, and I was just looking at it, and Sanford and I have this. We've been working together for coming up on 10 years because we did Power Man and Iron Fist at Marvel, and I would write stuff for him on Power Man and Iron Fist, and he'd text me or send me an email, and he'd be like, "Man, this can't be drawn." And I said to him, "Oh, it can be drawn. You just haven't drawn it yet." Like I was a huge fan of Sanford's before we met, a huge fan of his before we started working together. And one of the things I appreciate about working with him is I know what he's capable of, even if he might not know that he's capable of it. Yeah. And so issue 4 is in some ways is a more restraint, held back Sanford in terms of a lot of the flourish, bells and whistles that you'll see him do. But it's also like, man, his storytelling is spot on. The emotion in the characters is so amazing. And I didn't say this to him when I was talking to him on the phone. I didn't say this to him the other day because that's not how I am. But he's listening right now, and all these other listeners are listening. The people who listen later will hear it. And I really had this profound level of appreciation for what he does, that went to a whole new level with issue 4. And he hasn't shown me anything that he's done with issue 5 yet. But there's some stuff in issue 3 that's also like, all the issues. There's amazing art. We've all seen the art, right?
Yeah.
But it's for me, my philosophy is everything I do should be better than the last thing that I did. So even if it's a 5-issue story arc, issue 5 should be better than issue 1. And because I have that philosophy for myself, I hold that to other.
So basically, you're putting the fire under Sanford to outdo himself on issue 5. No pressure, Sanford. Oh, and by the way, he wants you to squeeze in as much story as possible. So he wants you to go to a 9-panel page so you can squeeze in more story that he's written.
It's funny because that's the other thing too, is like, and Sanford knows this. I tend to do a lot of like really rough layouts. They're like stick figures. They look terrible. They look like garbage. But if it's a complex scene or a complex page, I do this before I write the scene out to make sure that it can be done. I'm not saying it's going to be like easy, but I know that it can be done. And I just did this. I just turned in a script for a book I did for First Second. This graphic novel. It's like 260 some odd pages. Never worked with the artist before. And every 10, 15 pages, there's a note at the top of the page. Okay, look, man, you're going to think this page can't be done, but I've already done the layouts. I'll show them to you if you want to see them. But yeah, we can actually fit 20 panels onto a single page, right? And to me, it's all about the challenge. It's all about the challenge of. I was talking to Matthew Rosenberg about it. Matthew Rosenberg's one of my favorite writers in comics right now. He's, him and Tyler Boss are doing What's the Farthest Place from Here. They did 4 Kids Walking to a Bank. They're amazing. And I look at what they put on a page. I picked up, I want to say the first issue of the new Batman, the all-in or absolute Batman, whatever they call it. Couple of those DC absolutes, and was just studying the first issues and studying what people are able to fit onto a page. And what I like to tell everybody is the first issue of Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man story ever, Amazing Fantasy number 15, was only 11 pages. Look at how much story they fit into 11 pages. And if you can't fit at least as much as Stan Lee and Steve Ditko did, if you can't do in 22 pages what Stan Lee and Steve Ditko did in 11, get out of here, right? Everything that is truly Spider-Man. I'm not talking all the villains or J. Jonah Jameson or the Clone Saga or any of that.
Dear God, no, not the Clone Saga.
I'm not talking about any of that stuff, but I'm talking about the very core of who Spider-Man is, who Peter Parker is, was established in 11 pages nearly 70 years ago. And look what was built on it. And most creators come in wanting to, in their first issue, deliver what Spider-Man has delivered over 60 years, or what Superman or Batman has delivered over 80 or 90 years. I'm like, you're never going to be able to do that. But if you can do that, if you can do what, the Fantastic Four did in the first issue of Fantastic Four, right? Like, look at how long these series have lasted. Study the work of Jack Kirby. The first issue of pretty much any comic that Jack Kirby did at Marvel, study it. Because those were written with outlines. They weren't full script. So Jack Kirby is as much the writer as Stan Lee was.
He's a storyteller.
He's a storyteller. And if you study that stuff, you'll see, like, wow. And I feel like, look, we're charging, Bitterroot's $3.99 an issue. And some of y'all are kind enough to buy multiple copies, and you're buying the variant covers. Like, my philosophy is, we're going to give you that $3.99 worth, right? So we're going to give you $5.99 worth of comic in a $3.99 package.
Well, we have just a couple minutes left. Do you have enough time to answer some questions people have?
Sure.
All right. Is Agent York that would be telling?
Yes, that would be total spoiler. So I'm not saying nothing.
Next question.
Yes.
Will we see Muhammad Ali or any famous black leaders from the 60s? That's a good question.
That's a great question. We won't see them in this arc. The next arc, I can't tell you when it's coming, but I'd like to see some evolution of that. And if it's not Muhammad Ali, it would be a Muhammad Ali-like character. And there's a couple of musicians too. I would like I don't know how much trouble we'd get into with likenesses, to be 100% honest with you, but I'd like to see Sam Cooke, right? I'd like to bring in Sam Cooke and have Sam Cooke be an Inzondo, right?
Wow.
But that's just me.
You're gonna have to do your own amalgam characters to do that.
I'll have to create my own Teddy Perkins
there you go. Mr. Walker, how would the jinoo curse impact someone who is 1/8 black like Meriah from Sinners, or someone with even less black blood like Steven Tyler? Hate is hate, I don't think it.
Steven Tyler of
Aerosmith. Yeah, Aerosmith. He did. There was an episode of what's that PBS show where they talk about?
I know the one you're talking about. I didn't
the
realize.
Roots with Henry Louis Gates. He found out that Steve Tyler found out he's like 1/8 black.
Wow. Okay. How would that impact somebody? I think. Well,
that's a good question.
I know how it would impact somebody. It would. The reason I'm struggling for the answer is because I'm worried it might give away some stuff that's coming. But like if you identify as black, even if you only have 1/8 black blood, if you're by the way, does anyone know what a musty is?
A musty?
A musty, yes. A
Other than
musty
smell?
is an old term for like octoroons or quadroons. I'd never heard until very recently. And so like that's another thing they used to call, they called people like me a musty, right? I'm high yellow, you know. But a person who has like Mary in Sinners, Mary would turn into an Enzando because Mary, part of being an Enzando is that identity of blackness that exists in our core and soul, right? Now, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, Stacey Dash, she would never turn into an Enzando, you know. So Herman Cain, God rest his soul, you know, guys like that, they wouldn't, you know. Now, what would be interesting is what do they turn into, and I guess we'll have to explore that at some point.
Yeah, because if the concept of an Enzando is your experience, your feeling the repercussions of racism wells up hate within you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to identify.
It's hurt. It's pain and it's
pain,
trauma,
right?
And most of us react to pain and trauma with anger and hatred,
right? But you're not going to feel that pain and trauma unless you do identify as black, and so it is painful to be treated in that manner.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. But if you don't identify as part of the culture, you're not going to, that pain is not going to resonate with you to the point where it's going to make you turn into an Enzando.
Okay, so John Anthony Soltero asked this great question: are there other versions of Enzando that say Latinos, natives, or Asians might become? And the answer is 100% yes. And what I would love to do is get to a point where we could expand this universe so that we see that, right? So that we see that variation, and there's different triggers for it. I think what makes Bitterroot so unique, in the same way that the movie Sinners was so unique, is that the black experience in America is unique, that no other group has it, because no other group, even, you know, people say, well, what about indentured servants? And it's like, no, stop. Indentured servants indentured servitude is very different than slavery.
Absolutely.
Right? So nobody has that experience. So now I would say that, like, you know, when you look at like the history of Chinese immigrants and Japanese immigrants, they've been through some shit. They really have. And so if we ever get a chance to see it, we're going to see what their version of Enzando looks like, what their response to racism and oppression looks like. But it would be very different than what black folks turn into, because what black folks turn into is the end result of all of this trauma, of all of this oppression, of all of this being treated like we're less than human.
Right. And I don't want to go too down into the rabbit well with this, which I'm notorious for, but I'm fascinated by the concept, because when you talk about, for instance, the difference between slavery and indentured servitude. In slavery, with indentured servitude, they weren't taking away your name, your religion, your identity, your connection to your past and your ancestors. None of that existed with indentured servitude. I don't care how poorly you were treated.
Yeah.
You still didn't have those things taken away from you. And so with that type of reaction to racism, other cultures will experience racism, the Asians, the Latinos, the indigenous people, etc. But in those versions, they don't have those things taken away from them. And that inability to have that connection to your past, I'm curious to see how you reflect that particular difference between those other races and how they experience racism, and the difference between Black people and how it affects them, if that makes sense.
No, that totally
Because of
makes
that
sense.
lack of identity, because that's, to this day, our diaspora is always struggling with the concept of who are we,
Yeah.
and what is our connection to our past. That's with everybody from the Black diaspora, and other races don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's what makes us
And
a little different.
it makes us a little different, and it's but the thing that's also crucial that I'll add to that is that, like, oppression and dehumanization and just like the horrors that so many people have been put through, it ain't a competition, right?
Right,
And
right.
so when we're talking about the African diaspora, when we're talking about what collectively millions of us have been through, and that our ancestors have been through, it ain't trying to take away anything from anybody else,
Right. It's
right?
just recognizing the nuances and the
Yeah,
differences. And
the differences, and I think, but a lot of times when you try to have that, even start that conversation, people like bristle and they're like, "No, wait a minute, my people went through this and my people went through that," and I'm like, "Yes, they did," you
Mhm.
know, and if I can help you get your story out there, I'm going to help you get your story out there. But what I'm talking about is this particular story and this particular dynamic, right? I'm talking about the fact that my great great grandfather, who was born a slave, his mother was sold downriver when he was 5 and he never saw her again, right? That in and of itself is and that's one person, right? And that trauma affected him. And that trauma changes your DNA. It changes who you are. So that happens to him when he's 5, and then, by the time he's in his 20s and he's free and slavery has been abolished and he's starting his own family, that trauma is still with him, and he's going to pass that trauma on, not just through the stories that he's telling, but through what it did to him. And we're all dealing with that, that what we call the generational trauma, or they call it epigenetics, is what the
Mhm. Racial
you know
memory and
yeah, yeah. And like that to me is really fascinating, and it's why, you see a glimpse in issue 2 of Bitterroot. You didn't point him out, but there's a DJ, and he's, a radio DJ, and he's an Inzando, right? Like we're starting to play with this idea that there are, as we get there, if we ever get there, I have a story in mind for the 80s that takes place in the Bronx. And it's a Bitterroot story that takes place in the 80s in the Bronx. And we get into what does what do the Inzando look like in 1979, 1980, 1981? Because I can tell you what the Inzando looked like at that time, because I was alive then. And all you got to do is watch the movie Wild Style and you see it, right? Like where I would love to take this series as if we move further and further into it. And this is what I loved about Sinners, was how we take our traumas and we turn them into art, we turn them into creativity, which then gets embraced, then gets co-opted, then gets stolen from us. That's what I loved about Sinners. And the thing is that Sinners was able to do something that we can't do in comics, which was the music. We have a little bit of music, references to music in Bitterroot, but you can't play music. You can't show the people dancing. And it was so funny, because I know we got to wrap it up, but man, I had people like, man, they stole, the that scene in Sinners at the juke joint. Man, they lifted that right out of the first issue of Bitterroot. And I was like, yeah, and we lifted that right out of Ernie Barnes's Sugar Shack, right? Like no, don't get it twisted. Every script I write, every comic I write, always references Frank Frazetta. And a lot of times
mm,
I reference Ernie Barnes, right? Because Ernie Barnes and Frank Frazetta were 2 painters who I loved growing up as a kid. I still love them. And when I talk to people about how comics don't have movement, but you can create the illusion of movement, And when you look at a painting by Frank Frazetta, when you look at Ernie Barnes' Sugar Shack, you almost think those people are moving, that they're actually dancing. And that's what we're trying to do in comics, and that's part of what Sanford does, and why he gets mad at me, because I, always like pushing him. But it's like, if that pushing is what separates us from the other creators.
Mm. All right, so here's some other questions for you. Do you three own your IP outright?
Yes, it is the three of us. We own it equally.
So you could... No, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay.
Not on air anyway. Do you think the Bitterroot Crew will ever tackle the monsters to take advantage of our brothers and sisters in the hip hop culture? I think that's your 1980s story.
That's I'd like to do, because the 80s would allow us to do both hip hop and the crack epidemic, right?
Yeah.
And really get into how those devastated us, right? And what I'd love to do is keep Bitterroot going to a point where we're getting into more contemporary stories, and as we go further along, the world starts to become more detached from our reality, right? And so part of what we're doing in this next movement arc is we're playing with this idea that, oh, now people know that there was the jinoo, and they think they're all cured. Again, it goes back to the guy in Sinners, right? Clan don't exist no more.
I can't imagine you taking on the modern era and the MAGA movement. That would be, ooh. That would be a whole thing, man. Do you have a dream cast in your head?
Yes and no. I mean, I would like to see Michael B. Jordan in it, but not as much now. Not as much now that he's done Sinners. I'm a big John Boyega fan. I don't know who he would play, but I would love to see him in it. I would love to see, and this, nobody gets this, I want to see Ma Etta played by Janelle Monáe under a ton of makeup. I want to see her playing this 80-something-year-old woman. Brian Tyree Henry would be my first choice for Berg, for sure. Right. Ford, my first choice would probably be Idris Elba. Probably. And if not Idris Elba, Cullen. Originally it was Michael B. Jordan, right? Now it would be probably Lakeith Stanfield.
I was literally about to say Lakeith Stanfield.
And the thing is like, I think whoever directs the movie would have to push him really hard, because I think he's a great actor, but we see him mostly playing the same types of roles, right?
Yeah.
But to see him as a badass warrior would be dope.
The first time you got to see him push himself in that direction was in The Harder They Fall.
Yeah. And so and that's the beautiful thing. There's so many great actors out there, great actresses out there. I don't know who I would get I know who I would get for Blink. But only because I just want to be in the same room with her at some point and just be like, hey, girl, would be Zazie Beetz, right? I would just love,
Oh, wow.
She is a special kind of fine. And I hate to objectify her in that way. But I also think, who else would be dope though, is I don't know if she could act though, but there's this young woman on Instagram, and I think she's British. I think she goes by the name like Samus Ryder or something like that. And she's always making these videos, and she's
with the swords, with the afro. Yeah. She's actually doing a movie.
Yeah. And she's like, I don't know her. I just follow her because she is so badass. Yeah. And it's like, yo, you're just dope, and so if she could act, I don't know if she could. I don't know if she could do an American accent or anything like that, but she embodies a lot of what Blink is, right? Because Blink is a strong female character in an era when there was no place for them, and so they had to be 10 times stronger. They had to be 10 times more badass. So I'd like to see her, if there was a story that would be set in the I don't even want to mess with this 1964 arc. Now, if you want to get into old actors who've been dead for years, I could really tell you who I would have wanted. Like, I mean, Berg would have been played by an actor by the name of Frederick O'Neill, who was a well-known character actor in the 40s and 50s, and just brilliant actor, right? And Blink would have been Nina Mae McKinney, and Cullen would have been, I don't know, someone like James Edwards or someone like that. I mean, that's my thing. I love old black actors, black Hollywood, and there's a lot of great people out there. And Uncle Enoch would have been played by Mantan Moreland, who, even though everyone criticizes him because they think he was too much like Stepin Fetchit, and Mantan Moreland's one of the funniest comedic actors of all time. I don't care what anybody says, and I'll watch him in the most racist movies of all time, and I'll watch him. He makes my ass laugh. So.
I hear it's going to be a second printing of issue number. When is that? It's already happened, dude. It's already on pre-order.
Yeah, it's already I don't know when it comes out. I know it's happening. I thought it was supposed to come out last week, but I haven't. My comps haven't arrived yet, so I don't know when it's coming.
Yeah. Do you ever write just to see him draw a scene you want to see? Basically, being as much a fan as your partner, referring to Sanford Green.
Yeah. I make sure that we have scenes that challenge Sanford, but I don't ever give him anything just for the sake of giving him anything. I would never do that to an artist just to like. It always has to be in service to the story. And sometimes I even argue with some of my other collaborators where it's like, no, we don't need this right here, right now. But yeah.
Just throwing this out there, an audio scripted podcast that would be dope, especially if the movie is still in the waiting process. Brother Green hit up Charlemagne the God. That's a pretty good idea. I mean,
yeah, we would have to. That's a great idea, except like it might preclude us from a film deal, because most times they want all those sort of rights, but I'll I'll call my business partner and ask him about that, because that might be something interesting.
It doesn't really cost you anything, just your time.
Yeah.
Next. Does Sanford sell the covers all connected as one item?
That's a Sanford question, but
I have seen the connected cover original art that Sanford has done. I don't know if he sells that, but I assure you, if he does, it would not be cheap.
Yeah.
Vita Ayala writing the Izondo story would be dope. Yeah, Vita's a great writer.
Vita Ayala writing anything would be dope. They're one. I love their writing, and they're just a great human being. But again, that's the thing. Like, yeah, why wouldn't we? If we could get to that point where, and again, it'd be crucial that we have enough that we can pay someone like Vita, and we can't pay Marvel rates, right? But we also have to pay them fairly, simply because it is work for hire, right? Like whatever story someone like Vita writes, or an artist like, say, Ray Anthony Height draws for us, like, they're creating something for us. That's another thing that's really crucial to me, is like, I would want to make sure that, like, we're not doing to them, to any other creators, what's been done to so many of us creators,
right,
which is being shut out of the process. It's like, and they're like, but you can't pay everybody that kind of money if a movie gets made. But you don't want to be like, God, who was it I was just reading about? Because there was somebody who was getting screwed with Thunderbolts. As another creator, you're hearing, and it's happened to me, so I don't want to do that to somebody else.
Right. All right. I think that's all of our questions, David. We have to have you back for issue 3.
Okay.
When we break, I will look at the dates for the next. Hold on, I might be able to do it right now. Let me take a look, man. Issue 2. Issue 3 drops on May 28th.
May
May
28th.
28th. So we're going to coordinate having you come back and talk to us about issue number 3.
Okay, I can do that.
Preview issue 4. We'll work it out. But
Yes.
thank you for your time, man.
Thank you. It's always fun, and you know, I like chopping it up and being a nerd. So
Let's see if we can bring Sanford on next time too, if his busy
Sanford,
schedule allows.
to his credit, I know what Sanford's doing right now, and Sanford is drawing issue 5, or he might be. He's also supervising the colors for number 4, so he's hard at work. I can't take that away from him. So
of course. I do think if you have a lot of story you got to cram in there, go to that 9-panel page to make it work. I don't want any story cut out. That's what my biggest fear. I don't want anything that's going up in the David Walker brain not being able to be on the page.
I think we can make it work. So
all right. Well, thank y'all for in the chat for all your support. Please pre-order this book. It's up for pre-orders right now. You can still go ahead and pre-order number 3. Do that for the final order cutoff. We'll catch y'all next time. Black Comic Lords, we got you.